We have our guest speaker, Ethan, already in the room. This webinar is made possible by Imperial's Executive Education, especially the Executing Sustainability Strategies program. Ethan brings over 12 years of experience delivering sustainability, and he combines that sort of strategic insight with hands-on implementation in a unique way. So we would like this session to be interactive. So please post your questions using the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And we'll aim to address as many questions as possible after the discussion. So I'm going to pass on the baton to Ethan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bemi. And great, so great to be with you all. Truly delighted and honored to be speaking here today on this Imperial webinar. So I'll just skip ahead and tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So 4 kind of key points. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me so that you all know a little bit about why I'm here and speaking. And, I'm very much here today in a personal capacity, sharing a practitioner's viewpoint. I'm humble about my views. I don't claim in any way to know it all or to be the oracle in sustainability. I can share what I've experienced. And I hope that's useful for you all. Just as a little joke, as an aside, so that picture on the top right-hand side of your screen, it is me, yeah? But my wife was very quick to tell me when I showed it to her that, it's also clear now we're using AI filters on professional photos now as well. So talk about being brought back down to earth very quickly by your partner. But yeah, if you want to connect with me, it's up there. Be delighted to hear from you. And if you want to scan the QR code on the bottom right of your screen, you can also read over some of my published work, articles I've been writing over the past 10 years or so, and including also my MBA dissertation, which I'll get onto a bit later. The bulk of the conversation will be about sustainability in practice. So ultimately, it's where the rubber meets the road when you get into the operations. And I'm going to show you all a case study example focused on energy efficiency, renewable energy, material and waste management, and lean manufacturing principles, which for those of you who don't know is the elimination of waste and any non-productive work within a company. Thirdly, I'm going to talk a bit about the alignment of sustainability goals with financial performance. And I'm going to do that from what I've experienced in my career, but I'll also share an overview of my recent MBA research, which looked at 327 companies, sort of 10.6 trillion worth of market value, which is sort of 3 times all of the economic activity in the UK. So I can sort of give you the micro example from boots on the ground, and then also take it up to the macro level. And then finally, and it comes at the end, it's probably the most relevant to those who are looking to forge a path in the sector. I'll give you sort of reasons for pessimism and optimism, and just my own perspective on how to achieve career success within sustainability and that wider ecosystem. So that's the kind of topic for today. Okay, about me. So as Bemi mentioned previously, 12 years experience delivering sustainability, energy efficiency, renewable energy, waste reduction, operational efficiency, and laterally regulatory affairs in private equity-backed industrial companies. I'm currently a consultant at Zendo, a UK energy technology startup in the data center sector, which for those of you who don't know, is the fastest growing sector in human history. So I've got into that in recent months, and I'm really enjoying it. But previously, for almost 6 years, I was Global Director of Operations, Sustainability and Regulatory Affairs at Klockner Pentaplast, a pharma and food manufacturing business, circa 2 billion in revenues. Completed my executive MBA in 2025, chartered energy manager, board member of the Energy Managers Association, and some awards to boot. Tells you a little bit about me. I'm also an everyday down to earth kind of guy. Like to get out, run, watch the football, watch the rugby, usual stuff. So that's just, it all looks great on paper, but I'm very much a normal person behind the scenes. Yeah. So the key kind of focus area for today is execution. So you'll hear me say this a lot, but I do think strategy is hugely overrated as an idea. So the famous Mike Tyson quote of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And when you think about sustainability execution on the ground, it's very much keep that Mike Tyson quote in your head. And when I look at 2026, when I was preparing for this lecture, I came up with three problems as I see it. And then I looked at sort of academic papers and sort of recent research to kind of illustrate those. And first one is the capacity problem. So here you have the challenge of, sustainability, making organizationals, more sustainable, tackling challenges that we're facing. And yet the average size of the sustainability function within those organizations is 1 to 6 people. And that was from an EY project. You're free to, take a note and read it later. And just think about the fact that multinational companies have tens of thousands of employees. And yet the average central sustainability team in companies is 1 to 6 people. So there is also a resourcing problem quite clearly, but we'll get into that a little more. Then you get to the design problem. So ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, has not delivered. I think that's sort of becoming widely kind of recognized, and there's a political backlash to it that we all see in the news. I'm just taking some screenshots from the Financial Times on your screen. But a recent paper by the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leaderships, said it never could have. And the problem there was just layering sustainability strategies on top of businesses that are doing business as usual was never going to work. And we'll get into that a little bit further. And then my third sort of setting the context for today's session is what I call the outcome problem. So if you look at ESG and sustainability rankings and ratings and reports, they're very quick to talk about how well companies are doing in specific sustainability areas. But what the London Business School research called the end of ESG has talked about is that's fine in a vacuum, but the reality is, with the way the market economy is structured today, we want great companies, not companies that are scoring and performing well in specific areas of sustainability. And those two things are not the same at the moment. There are companies that are scoring well in sustainability that aren't great companies, and there are great companies that maybe are not doing sustainability at all. So I just thought that was a very nice reflection on, ultimately for sustainability to really thrive in companies, we need to be promoting great companies and not just great areas of sustainability. So that sets the context. Yeah. Now I'm going to talk about my experiential world. So having spent my career in the manufacturing sector. So I think this, is very relevant for anybody who is in that space, but also if you're not, it should also be interesting. When you think about the manufacturing sector, it is sort of just what I've seen and what I would consider sort of objectively true, that sustainability ranks after safety, quality, and the efficiency of operations. So I sort of have it there in my pictogram as ranking 4th. And that's just how the world is. So, we might wish it to be higher, but that's not the case. And what that generally means is, in a very complicated place, such as a factory, sustainability priorities and projects end up sort of something that's tackled on a Thursday or a Friday rather than on a Monday or a Tuesday, if you just think about it in very real terms. And one of the things I've always tried to do in my career is to connect sustainability to the culture of the efficiency and improvement of the operation. And typically in the manufacturing environment, there is already a long-standing culture of lean manufacturing, which is the elimination of waste, as I said earlier. And what you find is there is synergy between improving energy efficiency and also improving, I've got up here, the overall equipment effectiveness, which is the percentage of productive time of the available assets. Yeah, so where you can find synergies in manufacturing and you can lean into culture that's already long established, such as we want to be more efficient, you should always try to do that. My second point, which is very relevant for anybody here working in a global organization, is just the sheer scale and diversity of these companies. So, what works well in Europe may not work well at all in the US or in Asia. And that's before you even get into the difference in cultural beliefs, which we know very significantly worldwide. And it should always cause us to pause and think, what works well in one region or what, resonates with one person does not necessarily resonate with others. My third point, and it leads into, as I said, the context earlier about very small sustainability teams, is you really are going nowhere as a company if it's just done by one central team and not delegated and embedded across different parts of the organization. And what I mean by that, I don't mean that the central team is redundant and it's not needed. It absolutely is to drive it up the priority chain. But, think about very small central team, tens of thousands of employees. Just be humble about what your reach is. There's hundreds and thousands of people in operations teams and in, product teams. And it's so important to try to, distribute ownership and engagement with sustainability across those different teams. And the last point is sort of something that I've always felt and that I actually took into my MBA research last year, which was, integrating sustainability as a value creation driver. And I mean value creation in the financial sense, because that's ultimately, how most companies, like it or not, are measured in today's public and even private markets. So, we might wish it to be different, that, sustainability, has its own value, and I believe absolutely it does. And this is why I work in the sector. But in order to continuously improve the execution and operationalize sustainability where we can, we must always integrate it with long-term value creation and financial performance. And what that really means is prioritizing projects that improve the bottom line over others. And then when you're successful with those, you will create the space to maybe do other things. Yeah. And, certainly where we are now, setting the context where there's been a bit of a pushback about sustainability in companies, it's even more important to focus on that last bullet point in your roles today. So now comes the kind of fun part. So, I've just got one kind of little trick question, which is, I'm calling the case study easy. I'm calling the company Easy Company. So I just want to know if anybody sends in a message where the reference to Easy Company, does it ring a bell to anybody, from anybody who's maybe watched TV over the previous 15 years. So if anybody does know where Easy Company comes from, then please do let me know in the chat. But I just want you all just to pretend that you're responsible for executing sustainability within Easy Company, which is an international packaging manufacturing business. And on my lovely AI-generated image on the left-hand side of your screen, I've got a picture of Alex Rogo. Now, I would really recommend this book, The Goal, by Eli Goldratt. And it's called The Goal, yeah? And the scene that you're seeing is the kind of pivotal scene from the book. So head office comes to Alex Rogo's factory. He's the site manager, and says, you've got 6 weeks to save the factory. You're not making money. Your margins are gone. Your inventory is stocked up all over the site. You're not getting the orders out, and you're not ultimately converting raw material into cash for the company. And first thing he does is say, right, I'm going to go buy some pizza and beer. I'm going to have a look over the operations, and I'm going to see, what do I do now? Yeah. And the kind of central theme of the book is, you look at an operation, and if you look at those production lines in that photo, you could structure reporting and you could structure measurement of success as one of those lines performing well. but you might have a bottleneck on the other line, which meant that even if one line performs well, the second line is going to block up the operation, cause you to get stuck, cause you to hold inventory, cause you to hemorrhage cash. So it's about just holistically thinking, okay, what do I do now? Because what we're doing currently isn't working. And I want you to think about that question, what do I do now, in the context of sustainability and in the context of improving it in Easy Company. And I've got the facts about Easy Company on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll just try to summarize it. So, 600,000 tons of raw material bought every year. About 8% of that, as you can see, converted into recycling and waste. Material sent to landfill. The energy to make packaging is uses a lot of energy. So, you're talking about using the same amount of energy as 200,000 households, which is a small city similar to the size of Oxford, as an example. And you've got CO2 from both the operation on the ground, and then you have CO2 obviously from the material that you purchase in your supply chain. And lastly, when you look down through your P&L and you look at your costs, energy is one of your largest controllable financial costs, typically after raw material, labor, and then usually you get to energy somewhere around there. So that just sets the scene, yeah? Just keep that in mind as we're going through it, because I'll just talk to you about, how I've approached it and what I would be suggesting. But it just sets the scene about sort of the resource intensity of Easy Company. And if you say, right, we are going to focus on reducing energy consumption and reducing CO2 emissions. Yeah, very noble goal, very important. Ultimately that's the biggest driver of, tackling climate change, as we all know. So then you get to the question, is it like, how? Yeah, so I think the first thing to do is to form a task force, right? And I use the word task force, for those of you who are interested in sort of military and war, you hear the word task force used, typically means like, a cross-functional unit brought together for a specific purpose. Yeah. And in this case, in the context of a big international company, it's typically multifunctional. So you have someone from operations, you have someone from procurement, you have someone from supply chain, you have someone from finance, you have someone from sustainability, you have someone from health and safety. The idea is you bring together the best minds. Yeah. You don't in any way think that your view of the company is the right one. Yeah. It's the collective task force approach, bringing everybody's contribution, bringing everyone's ideas, and bringing everyone's point of view in to lead to the best outcome. And if you were to specifically talk about, okay, we know that this company uses the same amount of energy as a small city. Yeah. How do we go about actually reducing it? I mean, it's no different than anything. The first thing you do is you map it, right? So, and I'll show on the next slide sort of a good map of it. But, where is it being used? In what quantities? In what processes? In what departments? In what areas? My second point, and it's something like it's basically the underlying philosophy of my career in the context of decarbonization, which is energy efficiency first. So effectively that means that, you've got options for renewable energy generation at sites, and you see a lot about this in the news. But I guess most of you are probably not as aware that energy efficiency is actually just as big a driver of decarbonization if we are to hit sort of a net zero world at some point, after 2050. It's the improvements in efficiency will drive just as much CO2 reduction as all the renewable energy that you see. Yeah. And I'll get into energy efficiency first a bit later. And then once you've reduced your energy consumption, then you look at, can you make renewable energy at your sites? And then kind of lastly, you look at buying it. And I sort of have always had this idea called the energy hierarchy. I mean, all of you will know about the waste hierarchy, or at least you should. Yeah, so, reduce, reuse, and recycle. In energy, I have this thing called lean, clean, and green. So ultimately, use less, invest in projects that have greater efficiency. So upgrading motors, upgrading, as an example, more efficient electric vehicles, just upgrading light bulbs, whatever the case may be. And then lastly, in the hierarchy, you would then use renewable energy. But think about it as a hierarchy in the same way in waste. It's about reducing first. That's the greenest approach. Then reusing, and then, of course, recycling. Lastly, then disposing. So It's about just getting across a point that you know, energy efficiency comes first before you look at renewables in any decarbonization strategy. And you know, 1,000 years ago, there was I guess he was a monk, or maybe you call him a priest, I'm not sure, but his name was William of Ockham, and he had this principle called Occam's razor, which is the simplest solution is generally the best one. And you know, in my career on the ground, executing sustainability, I always stick to that one. There's a lot of people, you know, that promote different areas and look at very complicated things, but you know, on the ground, I think if you can keep Occam's razor in mind, you won't go wrong if you're in an execution of sustainability. Coming back to my map, just checking on time. Yeah, we're okay. Coming back to my map. So, as I said, you know, Easy Company is using energy equivalent to 200,000 homes. You know, you've got to kind of ask yourself 4 questions. Number one, what types? So, in the case of Easy Company, it's electricity more than gas, more than any other liquid fuels. Where it's using, if you see on your screen, you know, the bulk of it is used in the plastic processing machines, cooling systems, compressed air, the usual stuff you see when you walk around the factory. I think an important point, maybe not as well understood, but it is to those who are working on it day to day, is just the importance of temperature levels. So, you know, energy consumption doesn't go up linearly to temperature. It goes up sort of as a power function. So, you know, the higher temperatures you use significantly more energy than lower temperatures. So where you have heat, obviously heat is just a form of energy. So where you have heat, you've got opportunity to save energy and money. Yeah, and I just think for anybody who is, you know, working in this area, you know, being able to think about it through these lenses is helpful. And I come to the energy efficiency first principle that I spoke about earlier. You know, the nice saying is the most sustainable energy is the energy you don't use in the first place. I think we all understand it conceptually, but it's another thing sort of going at it on the ground. A great example of is for anyone who's seen a compressed air system. A great example is just tackling leaks in a compressed air system sort of every 2 months, every 3 months, every 4 months. Generally speaking, about 10% of the air that's sent from a compressor around the site is lost as leaks. So, you know, you're talking about, you know, a lot of money saved and a lot of energy saved if you tackle that effectively. That's also an example of a lean process, right? So going after waste. And, you know, I've never met anybody in any manufacturing site who's encouraged waste. So, you know, once you tap into that lean philosophy, generally speaking, you can't go too far wrong. After getting past the energy efficiency point, you know, then it becomes right. We know we still need to use energy, so we need to convert it from sort of fossil fuel based to renewable based. And this is the sort of matrix I would look at for my company. This is also relevant for a commercial building. This is also relevant for a university building. Something similar like this. So you know, you sit down, you work with whoever is necessary, some external support, different suppliers. You say, right, what are the technology options available for us to convert our energy consumption into renewables? And you make a list, and I put up on the screen here. I've got solar energy, I've got heat pumps, which is electrical heat. I've got wind, I've got hydrogen, I've got biomass, I've got battery storage. I've got sort of the main ones. And then you look then across sort of, I always had 3 criteria. Does it make financial sense? Is it suitable for the buildings and the land that we have? And does it work for the processes at the site? And what you quickly find is once you do this sort of triangulation, you'll be able to prioritize what is the best technology for your site. And what you see is, you know, different reasons as to why, you know, not every technology is relevant. And I especially believe in the case of manufacturing where space is really at a premium, you know, that solar energy generally comes out on top. And I think heat pumps for, you know, space heating is also a very important one. But this map would look different depending on the company that you're at. Another kind of an aside for me, if you think about a heavy industry using site, or think about the biggest warehouse you've ever seen, and just imagine that entire roof is covered with solar panels. You know, you're still not going to get to sort of 10% of that site's consumption being met by solar energy in a year. So that just sort of illustrates again the density of energy in manufacturing, right? And this is why gas and as fossil fuels have been successful up to now, because the sheer density of the energy contained within them. And we have to realize in the context of renewable technologies that you don't have that same sort of energy output, and it's obviously variable and different things. But I think just keep that in mind that it's a very real challenge to convert the manufacturing facility into renewables just based on the available space around it. Which is why you will, generally speaking, always need to buy in renewable energy. And most of you will be familiar with this from maybe your house, or from you've probably been looking at this in some of you in your commercial and your corporate lives as well. Just to kind of illustrate my point, I'll take you through top down. As I said, you're always only going to get a couple of percentage of your manufacturing site from an on-site solar array on your roof. If you're lucky, and if planning conditions allow, and if there's grid connection available, and if you've got a willing partner and available land, you might be able to build a bigger array sort of within a 1 kilometer radius of your site. But generally speaking, what you see most industrial companies in Europe doing is entering into what are called power purchase agreements, where you commit to buying a certain volume of energy at a certain price from a renewable energy scheme that is away from your plant. And the key point there is that although you're not directly benefiting from that energy, you are able to sort of net it out using accounting rules and claim that it is renewable energy that you are bringing to the grid. And the key word there on the sort of third box down is this idea of additionality. So when you think about generating renewables, the kind of the way it's judged in terms of how green it is by your activities bringing additional renewable energy onto the grid. And that is different to the last point, which is sort of buying already existing certificates, which has been happening for years, but it's not necessarily the greenest solution. It is better than not doing it. In a sense, it does recycle some money back to renewable developers and into the sector. But I think the key word there, as we look forward and think about really transformation, we always need to think about bringing additional physical energy onto the grid. So that just sort of gives you an overview of the different aspects of mapping energy efficiency first, looking at what you can do on site, and then looking at buying in from external. So I've changed the photo. The beer, the pizza and beer is gone, and it's replaced with sort of very much a manufacturing site. It looks like black coffee and a croissant. Yeah. And question I kind of have is like, so where did the Easy Company get to after 5 years? And sort of the results are on the screen. So it got to sending zero waste to landfill, which I could elaborate further. It got to 10% less overall waste generated, 19% less energy consumption used, and on-site solar at 6 sites, and then sort of 50% less operational emissions, which for those of you in the sector, it's known as scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that's sort of, I think it's a good reflection of how long it would take to get those results based on that profile. Yeah. And that's with the task force formed, that's with real focus and engagement, that's with executive top buy-in, that's with a lot of things going well. Yeah. And as I kind of swing that towards real life, so, obviously my company KP, I've sort of loosely based the case study on KP, and, what we were immensely proud of was sort of delivering 15 million of cost savings from more than 400 projects, sustainability projects, mainly focused on energy over a 5-year period from 2020 to 2025. So I again come back to my point from earlier about linking in sustainability and bottom line impact. And if you're not doing it actively in your role today, take a step back and think, all right, how can I show that my work hits the P&L or the profit and loss statement, for those of you who wouldn't be familiar with that word. And, it was really rewarding to see that the work we did at KP sort of did, and was recognized as doing so. And sort of brought a lot of the hard work to fruition. So moving on to the next aspect of my talk, sort of went into the sort of execution on the ground, sort of edging now towards that point about how do you connect it to financial performance, yeah? And what I'm going to do is just share like what I think the factors at KP that enable us to be successful. And I'll tell you a little bit about my sort of house of sustainability on the right-hand side of your screen also. What I think worked well for us at KP was it was grounded in business performance. I love this saying that sustainability should inform core strategy or activity and not orbit it. So just imagine having a sustainability strategy that's like orbiting the sun or orbiting the earth like the moon. Yeah, it's no good. Yeah, it has to be within the operation. And my second point is, there's always been a monster demand to make factories more efficient. And ultimately, as I've shown earlier, we just tapped into that. Um, Traditionally, and I think some of us still face it, and in some cases it is true, but it's not always true, that sustainability has been seen as costly and slowing down operations and diverting resources away from core activities. But where you can, you need to challenge that underlying assumption. Because when you can connect sustainability to improving operational efficiency, generally speaking, the doors will start to open for you. And I think, you got to challenge that head on. There are many people that will try to tell you that your work isn't as important as theirs. And that's not true. Yeah. And you just have to stand your ground sometimes. Yeah. But, my kind of last point is to say, you also have to be realistic, right? So there has been a way too much in the news or in the press and in the literature and on LinkedIn and in all these areas about how everything in sustainability is good for business and good for bottom line. And I just don't believe that's true, right? So, and there are trade-offs. And ultimately, like, you have to pick your battles, and you're going to lose some, and you're not going to get every project approved, and you're not going to get everybody's time when you want it. And, it's better to be honest about that. Yeah. And I think I use the word trade-offs a lot because it really is, something you see on the ground. There's always reasons, not to do things, and you just have to be honest about where sustainability is and move forward from there. Then just my sort of pillars here, just think about, like, at the base of any house is sort of, actually what's happening on the ground, like how is the operations running. You layer on a strategy. Again, I prefer probably to use the word, you layer on an execution implementation plan. Yeah. Then you focus on specific areas that deliver financial value. So in my case, it's always been energy, materials, waste, renewables. And then ultimately, like, if you do those areas well, you will be able to be proud of what you report publicly. You'll be able to improve your scoring. And then at the very top, if all that is done well, it should also lead to improved financial performance of the company. So it just sort of gives you a flavor, sort of how I think about sort of the role in operationalizing sustainability. I don't want to dwell too long on this, and some of you will be thinking, why is there a little infographic with the matrix on your screen? Yeah. Obviously, I've been telling you about sort of on the ground how you go about operationalizing sustainability, but my curiosity in this topic led me to, okay, I saw on the ground how I can make a company more financially, perform better while doing sustainability well. But I wanted to see, does that sort of map in the macro picture when you look at other industrial firms? And as part of my MBA research, which you can read if you follow the QR code, I'm not suggesting that you should put aside the time for that, but I looked at sort of ESG metrics, particularly resource and CO2 efficiency. I looked at whether it was linked to higher company financial valuations, which is ultimately a measure of the profit to the market value of the company. Yeah. I looked at 327 global industrial and manufacturing firms representing about 10.6 trillion in market value, which is, all the economic activity in the UK in a year, 3 times that. What I found was when you look at firms that are performing well in sustainability, you do see that they're valued higher, right? So in the case of the resource efficiency metric, which is a specific sort of London Stock Exchange metric, the scoring in the top quartile of resource efficiency means that your financial valuation is 24% higher than in the bottom quartile. And for the case of CO2 emissions, it's 17% higher. So what you can sort of claim, in my sample, this is not necessarily generalizable across the entire economy. Yeah. But what you can see is, like, there is a correlation between good ESG performance and financial performance. But in the key point is the 4th bullet point down. Correlation does not equal causation. So once you adjust the data to take into account the size of the companies, because generally speaking, companies that are bigger are valued higher because there's more profit, for example, to be converted to cash or a dividend. And once you adjust the data set to account for company size, this premium that you see above sort of disappears. And I think that reflects what I could read in the literature and what I found in my study, this core tension in ESG finance literature, which is it sustainability is driving financial value, or is it financial resources? And by that way, I mean scale and big companies and investment opportunity and capital. Is it those companies that are performing really well financially can then invest more in sustainability? And that's sort of, I don't have a conclusive answer to it, but that's the second part, that it's, scale and resources allows company to do sustainability well, sort of where I landed in my research. And I do believe the design of ESG ratings, for those of you who are familiar with it, is part of the problem. And that's why I use the word like, although on the surface, it does look like there's a correlation. When you really drill into it and you adjust your data set, it's a bit of an illusion. The fact that, ESG and financial performance are always correlated. And that's why I had the nice analogy of, when Morpheus asks Neo to bend the spoon in the Matrix, yeah, and the key concept there is, the spoon is actually not real, yeah, and it's sort of, from what I can see, we do need to be humble as well about the ESG rating system and look at it for what it is and not for what we might wish it to be, because certainly I didn't get a conclusive answer, and I don't believe, I would have been expecting it, but I didn't get a conclusive answer that ESG and financial performance are correlated, and there's clear causation there. So for anyone who's interested in this topic a bit further, be delighted to talk to you about it. But just nice to show you a little bit about going from the micro to the macro. And in my last sort of 10 minutes or so, I want to take you through I've got 4 take-home messages. I think this is for anyone who wants to be a practitioner in the field. I think this is the sort of key aspect of the talk. In 2026 and sort of in 2025, it is incumbent on us all in the sector to embrace the hard truth of where it's at. It has gone backwards. Yeah, there's no question in my mind. You can read maybe opinions to the contrary, but the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes of all time is Carl Sagan, who some of you may know. Better by far to embrace the hard truth than suffer reassuring fables. Yeah, and in 2026, conversations are cautious. Targets are being pushed back, wholesale across the board, be it governments, be it companies. There's this sort of illusion of progress that I really do struggle with. So, barring a very small number of companies, I do believe that the majority of companies are sort of giving off an illusion we're further along than where we are. Yeah. And I just come back to something very basic. Yeah. Most of the biggest companies in the world are saying that they're reducing their emissions, and yet emissions are rising. Yeah. So just think about that for a second. Yeah. And when you think about sort of net zero, we could have a long conversation about that. I don't want to get into it now, but it just leads me on to it's time to rethink, and for us who work in this space to think, what is the fundamental purpose about corporate sustainability and executing it and being involved in it? And, are we strategic storytellers, or are we action orientated, value generating, boots on the ground people where we can? Yeah. And, my kind of final message there is it is an uncertain time. There's a lot of ambiguity, but it's just sort of case of embrace it, right? Take it on the chin. It's going to pass at some point, but it's just it's sort of a time, I think, where sustainability is being challenged from a lot of angles. Yeah. And it leads into sort of a word I've used a few times today, but this point about humility, right? So I like the saying, we need to say less and mean more, and I've become increasingly frustrated with what I see as marketing claims selling sustainability that are well beyond the engineering realities. Yeah. And it's not obvious on the ground, it's not obvious, how you can decipher it, but when you kind of know what to look for, it's a bit clearer. Yeah, and I think just humility in that, like, start doing it, and doing it where we can. And also another point about, like, it's not an ideology. So in the case of decarbonization, it really is like it's in the realm of science and engineering, right? It's in the realm of, like, improving technology, improving efficiency. You can see it in the numbers, and certainly in the case of the corporate world, like, being overly ideological is probably not a good way to be. There are organizations available to you to work in or to be part of if you'd like to do that, but it does tend to turn people off in terms of getting involved in it. Closing the gap between stated targets and actions. Look, it really is a big problem in this area. Communication isn't commitment. I said earlier about sustainability strategies are hugely overrated. Sort of that very famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I really like it because ultimately, what's underneath the surface and what people are really feeling and how they see their roles and how they see their activities and what they call culture. Sort of, I think the word they usually lose is how we do things around here is a lot more important than writing a glossy 100-page strategy and expecting the world to change around that. It can make you feel good, but I don't think it's very actionable. And then that point I said about trade-offs, ultimately there is a clear tension between short-term financial results for companies and investments in long-term decarbonization and other sustainability initiatives. Yeah, and to not acknowledge that really does sort of set you up for difficult conversations and maybe not progressing as you'd like in your career. My third point, again, it's basically it's my motto for my work, right? So everybody wants results. Everybody wants to deliver performance. Everybody wants to be seen to be doing a good job. I have a very basic philosophy. It's basically you create strong relationships first, and then the results follow. And it's not the other way around, right? You don't. I'm going to get results, and then I'm going to try to make relationships after. Ultimately, you won't get results without relationships. Come back to my earlier point about there's 1 to 6 people in sustainability teams, yeah, and let that sink in. You are depending on the network and the reach that you can make through your relationships in a company. Yeah. My second point, and this is really, really big one for me. So, like, it's this idea of talking down to people. Yeah. And I don't believe, and look, of course, I hold myself included. I don't believe professionals in the space have done enough to demystify sustainability at every opportunity. And what we've kind of done is created a veneer, and it's kind of a self-serving veneer that, like, it's very difficult to understand, and we'll help you to do it. Yeah, but you can't really participate in it. And look, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it well enough, right? So that's another one of my basic philosophies. We can do better at demystifying sustainability, getting rid of jargon, connecting it to just underground, down to earth improvement, business processes, rather than pontificating from on high. Yeah, I appreciate. Now I'm here today lecturing you all, but I get the sort of lecturer's prerogative today. Again, I said earlier about culture. Iceberg theory. If those of you don't know it, it's a really nice one. So, like, obviously, what 6/7 of an iceberg is below the surface, only 1/7 is above. It's similar when you look at, right, okay, how am I going to execute sustainability within an organization? What's said on the surface is not necessarily the what you need to focus on in order to be successful underneath the surface. Yeah, so focus on that. Assume goodwill on the part of others. Sort of look, some of these are just self-explanatory, doing that you do in everyday walk of life. I said earlier about don't be ideological. Like, it's far better to be inside the room where it happens, and than to be outside looking in. Yeah, being part of the problem. One of the things I've sort of always focused on in my career is doing the basics brilliantly. Give you an example of that. I created a campaign around Christmas shutdowns in our factories where sites were closed for between 1 and 2 weeks. And I created a campaign around like an award for the site that used the least energy during shutdown. Very basic idea. Yeah. Saved hundreds of thousands of pounds over 1 week. Yeah. Getting the big ideas right. I think that's the same in any career. If you get to sort of get certain things wrong, it can be hard to come back from. Certainly, as an advocate and a person with passion in sustainability, how you show up does influence others, and you sort of do have an obligation to be one of the most passionate people in your organization about the topic. That sort of just comes with the territory. And sort of last point, the old Latin phrase, acta non verba, deeds, not words, doing the right thing. Just sort of basic principles that ultimately will stand you in good stead. And sort of, as I wrap up, really looking forward to some questions. Just general career advice. So I'm just going to talk about when you actually break companies down, and I appreciate I've not covered every organization here, and there's going to be nuances and differences. But if you think about organizations in the most simple terms, and you think about where the power sits, the senior people, the budget, the decision making, the ownership of the profit and loss, and the cost control. Generally speaking, in commercial companies, it's sort of three areas. So products, so what's designed and sold, and that can be a software product, or as we've seen earlier in manufacturing. Operations, so every company has an operations team. Every company has to move something forward or deliver it, or improve processes to enhance efficiency. And lastly, sales. Yeah. And what I kind of my advice to anybody who's looking at sustainability as a career is, if you can position yourself to be able to add value from within one of those three overarching domains, whether that's in the case of products, whether that's working in new product innovation for more sustainable products, which is a huge growing area of employment. In my case, it was operational efficiency. It was forming part of a wider operations team. And then sort of on the sales, I mean, you can talk marketing there, you can talk communications, you can talk anything that's helping, the company, win externally in the marketplace. And I think you won't go too far wrong if you are sort of angling your career to be able to add value from within one of those three domains. Yeah. Admittedly, this leaves out sort of consultancy and many other areas, but just thinking about sort of big multinational companies, I think it's kind of a useful heuristic to think about. And sort of as I kind of finish, just sort of basic, my own philosophies, like be the CEO of your own career. I mean, this isn't accounting. You have to kind of choose your area within sustainability or renewables that you want to go down, and you have to go after it, because there are many different routes. You can work in early stage companies, you can work in big companies, you can do consulting, you can do academia, you can do so many different things. But you got to take responsibility for that yourself. I like the kind of thing at the bottom, which is ultimately performance is at the base of everything. You have to deliver in your role. You build an honest reputation, so your image, and then you gain visibility, and that can, those kind of three things together will generally lead to career progression. Sort of, I always like to give the sort of simple things at the end, right? But no egos. I mean, if you're working in sustainability with an ego, you really are in the wrong place, because you are depending on relationships, as I said earlier, and really, build those, and you have a chance of being successful. And then the last point is sort of, work hard and never give in. I mean, it's kind of relevant because, it's not all plain sailing. There is a lot of burnout with people who work there, because ultimately, as I learned earlier, resourcing isn't great. Strategies, ideas, initiatives, action plans can all change. Leadership can change, and you have to be resilient within the sector. That said, it's hugely rewarding to wake up every day and to feel that you are standing for something bigger than yourself. And from my point of view, it's like one of the reasons you get up in the morning and get going and get stuck into this is because you can always answer that question about why. Once you start with why, when you're in this sector and you're working in this area, it's a really nice place to be. So I think I'm a little bit over time, but I think that's it. I hope you learned something. I really enjoyed it. I know I was, looking forward to having some questions now, but I'm handing over to Bemi, and I'll do my best to answer what I can.
Thank you so much, Ethan. I love the breadth and the depth of the presentation because even for a new entry into sustainability, or someone who has been here for years, or someone who is a CSO can benefit from the knowledge you shared and the experience you have in this space. So it's time for sort of questions and discussions. You're welcome to type your question in the Q&A path, or if you want to speak, you can just let us know and we'll unmute you. So I have a first question that has just come up. In what time frame do you think companies will add more human resources in sustainability departments as against total staff strength? The ratio is very low.
Yeah, it is very low. And look, I mean, there are certain companies like there are big, pharmaceutical companies, as an example, that have teams of 20 more. There are some, think about the hyperscalers, the Magnificent Seven, they've got a lot more. There are consultancies that have teams of hundreds of people. But, again, I'm talking about the average, sort of international companies, sort of EY's research showed it was between 1 and 6. And it actually does fit with what I experienced. So I was in a team of 3 people and we had 5,600 employees. Yeah, 3 or 4 people. Some sort of ancillary people as well. But it's an interesting question. I can't give you a definite answer. I think what's amazing to me is when I started out working in this area 12 years ago, we were always on an upward curve. We didn't go into this for the money at the beginning, because let me assure you, we were not paid that well. Starting out as a sustainability project manager when I started out in 2014, 13, 14. And we were always on this upward curve. So it was always more employment opportunities. If I go back 12 years ago, there weren't director positions in sustainability, right? And I became a sustainability director. So, what I'm saying is it has grown, yeah. But then what happened, sort of 2025, 2026, it just sort of, they used the word the ESG winter, and there is still a lot of jobs when you look online, yeah. So don't let anybody tell you that there's no jobs out there. There is, but it's going through just a bit of a siesta at the moment, a bit of a quieter period. I think in terms of growing the number of employees within organizations. Ultimately, the political will and the momentum around regulation and the momentum around companies being leaders in the space will in the future drive more people to be working in the space. But I couldn't give you a time on it. I think like there's so much innovation, there's so much good stuff happening that it is just a matter of time, and ultimately new technologies, new ideas, new innovations will deliver more sustainable products to the market and more sustainable operations. But I don't really have a sort of a time that I think, oh, by 2030 there'll be, the teams will have doubled. There's just so much uncertainty. We've all seen sort of the political undercurrents, most notably from the US, that aren't necessarily conducive to that growth. But please don't in any way take it as a very negative. I think we've already come so far, and there's more to go.
Thank you. The second question is, do you have any experience with biodiversity in your sustainability assessment?
Yeah, so look, I've got, experience in biodiversity from a position of, we've always looked at reporting it and, reporting it externally, reporting it internally. I probably have been very deliberate to not spend my organization's time on diversity, because come back to one of my key conclusions from this talk today, I hope, is connect sustainability to financial value. And, unfortunately, biodiversity isn't one of those areas where, you'll be able to show an improvement to the bottom line, and to the P&L. That doesn't in any way take away from it. I think, probably not doing enough in that area. I think it's an area of, companies will be looking at always contributing, initiatives in the space, but it's not an area I focused on too much deliberately beyond just the sort of standard reporting internally, externally. Um, you will also find that majority of companies are doing nice, depending on where they're located, they will be doing nice things like bee farms and fish farms and flowers and gardens and many different things. There's when you look under the surface, there are things that have been done for years that will contribute to biodiversity. But yeah, it wouldn't be an area that I've focused a particular amount of time on.
Okay. So I think we can take two more questions because I'm just looking at the time. So the next question is, in your view, how is the rise of AI shaping the future career development roles and competencies expected of sustainability officials, professionals, sorry.
It's a very good question, actually. Um, Kind of interesting view here. I mean, AI should be causing us all to be even more humble. I use that word about like what we add. So like, I've given you a lecture today, practitioner's lecture, but let me be very clear, like ChatGPT or Perplexity or all these, they're a lot smarter than me, So um, you know, adapting to it, we have to sort of see the world as it is. Yeah. Like obviously becoming using it as a decision making support tool to help you ground your concepts and ideas and actions in facts and evidence and using it as a sounding board. I mean it's effectively like having a brilliant team member available at all times. um, that ultimately won't transform organizations, right? That'll help you as a person, but it's not going to deliver the productivity benefit that the economy needs based on the investment that's happening in the technology. um, I wouldn't be so from the professional point of view, yeah, just get used to using it and keep delivering and be humble and focus on all the things you read about being smart on all the soft skills and all the things that AI can't do for you. But humility about what it can do and the power of it, and for you never to take your career for granted is sort of a point I would have. Um, you also have to just look at the downside of it as well. Like although a lot of the sort of AI companies are, as I said earlier, buying in renewable energy to run their sites, but you really are getting an explosion of energy consumption from the use of AI, and you know not everything that they're saying about renewables is actually factually, is like there's accounting techniques being used to make it look better than it is, in my opinion. Yeah. So big questions about that. But I'm neither a pessimist or an optimist about it. I'm just sort of following the trend, and I think it's exciting. I think it's hugely beneficial, and being humble and being ready for how we can use AI is a really positive thing.
Thank you. And then the final question is, how do you handle pressure to move processes to countries less focused on sustainability?
Hmm. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, so when you think about, come back to that word about organizational culture, so how we do things around here. Um, Although the regulation in Asia, it's a region I've worked in, um, wouldn't be anywhere near as strong as Europe. The commitment to do something once the decision has been made to do it is probably stronger, right? So if I take the case of like, okay, if we decide in a factory in Thailand that we are going to focus for this year on reducing emissions and reducing waste, they will go for it because that's the sort of sort of culture and leadership style, collaborative, sort of team based view. So even though the regulation mightn't be as strong, um, there are generally speaking other factors that can almost outweigh that, such as we're going to get stuck into this because we believe it's the right thing to do. So yeah, it's a very real question there. Globally, like sustainability is challenged by that point about some regions not having to play by the same rules. Um, but I think international companies can do a lot around, setting the standard, setting the sort of North Star about what good looks like, and then sort of implementing and operationalizing that across global operations, um, in insofar as possible. So yeah, not a clear answer in the sense of, oh, you do this or that. I think you just you embrace you look at the organizational culture and you work forward from there.
Thank you so much, Ethan. We are right on time. Thanks to everyone who attended this webinar. Have a lovely rest of the day. And for delegates who attended the ESS program in December, if you wanted to wait behind to have a chat with us, you're welcome to. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.
Wonderful to be with you, Bambi. Wonderful to be with you all, and take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Ethan.